At exactly 9 a.m. on October 12, 2025, in Courtroom 402 of the Baltimore County Family Court in Maryland, Victoria Sterling's mocking chuckle cut through the solemn atmosphere. She leaned down, whispering into her son Arthur's ear, "Look at her. A lowly clerk who can't even afford a decent lawyer. Today, we are stripping away her custody rights, and she will be out on the street empty-handed." Sitting on the opposite side, Evelyn Vance maintained a terrifying silence. She wore a thick, moss-green wool overcoat buttoned up to her collar, completely concealing what lay beneath. She had no accompanying lawyer, carrying only a worn-out black leather briefcase with frayed corners. On paper, she was just a recently divorced single mother with no stable job and a history of frequent absences. But the wealthy Sterling family had no idea that her overcoat concealed the full ceremonial dress uniform of a major in the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG, of the United States Army. And that worn-out leather briefcase did not contain welfare applications, but federal arrest warrants ready to crush their entire billionaire dynasty. The next 30 seconds would decide who truly ruled this courtroom. To understand why a high-ranking military prosecutor like Evelyn Vance had to hide her identity from her own husband's family, we must go back 6 years. In 2019, Evelyn married Arthur Sterling, the second son of the Sterling family, owners of Sterling Logistics, a massive transportation empire worth over $150 million, based at the Port of Baltimore. The Sterling clan had long used wealth and influence to manipulate local officials. To them, the law was merely a tool that could be bought. When Arthur brought Evelyn home to meet his family, his powerful mother, Victoria Sterling, immediately looked down on her. Evelyn introduced herself as a government administrative legal staff member, a job title she was forced to use to comply with security clearance regulations while handling sensitive cases at Fort Meade. In Victoria's eyes, a government administrative staffer was synonymous with a poor beggar freeloading off her son's fortune. The anecdote of Victoria Sterling. Victoria's arrogance was best displayed on Christmas Eve of 2021 at the Sterling estate in the exclusive neighborhood of Roland Park. As Evelyn stepped out of a rusty taxi, carrying her green military duffel bag, Victoria was already standing on the porch. Without a single word of greeting, she gestured for her private chauffeur to snatch Evelyn's bag and toss it straight into a dirty puddle of melting snow by the roadside. Victoria coldly said, "In this house, we use Louis Vuitton luggage, not cheap lower-class garbage. You are ruining my family's aesthetic." Arthur stood right next to his mother, never opening his mouth to defend his wife, only bowing his head to look at the dirty puddle. Evelyn was not angry. She silently picked up the bag. Victoria could never have known that inside that cheap bag was the Bronze Star Medal Evelyn had been awarded for courageously protecting top-secret legal documents during a base attack in Iraq. The anecdote of Arthur Sterling. Arthur was a weak-willed man who lived completely in the shadow of his mother and his lawyer brother, Richard Sterling. A memorable event occurred when their son, little Leo, turned 2 in 2022. Arthur's grandfather, before passing away, had secretly established a $5 million trust fund for his great-grandson Leo, under the condition that the child's legal guardian must be a person of good moral character. Upon discovering this money, Victoria pressured Arthur to secretly sign an agreement changing the trust's guardian from Evelyn to herself, using the excuse that Evelyn frequently traveled abroad for unknown reasons. Arthur stealthily took Evelyn's fingerprints while she was sleeping to finalize the paperwork. When Evelyn found out and confronted him, Arthur only stammered, "Mom said you don't deserve to manage such a large amount of money. You are just a lowly wage earner. It's best for Mom to keep it." This betrayal from her partner was a crack that could never be mended. The consequences of this battle reached far beyond a standard divorce dispute. The Sterling family wanted to use this lawsuit to set a precedent, that they could use money to strip away custody of any child, turning the local court into their corporate backyard. If Evelyn lost, little Leo would fall into the hands of a corrupt, decaying dynasty where money stood above morality. but they had vastly underestimated the woman they called a lowly clerk. In June 2024, Arthur officially filed for divorce under the direct orders of his mother and brother Richard. To prepare for their plan to seize little Leo, Richard Sterling, a lawyer notorious for his dirty tricks in Baltimore, constructed a flawless case against Evelyn. They accused her of being an irresponsible mother who frequently neglected her family. Her sudden deployments to military bases in Germany or Okinawa to interrogate corrupt officers were twisted into secret, aimless getaways and signs of infidelity. Richard sent Evelyn an ultimatum at a quiet cafe. "Sign the paper relinquishing custody, and we will give you $50,000 to vanish from Maryland. Otherwise, I will use the entire influence of the Sterling clan to paint you as a homeless psychopath in court." Evelyn looked straight into Richard's eyes, sliding the $50,000 check back. Her voice was cold yet exceptionally calm. "Richard, the law is not a toy for Sterling Logistics. I will see you in court." Richard laughed out loud, stood up and said, "Let's see what lawyer in this entire city of Baltimore you can afford who dares to stand against us." Relaxation segment, lowering the pace. Evelyn returned to her small, temporarily rented apartment near Fort Meade. The unit was barely 50 square meters, but was kept immaculately neat in military fashion. There were no luxury paintings on the walls, only little Leo's drawings hanging next to a world map. She held Leo in her arms, reading him a story about knights defending justice. Leo looked up and asked, "Mommy, Grandma said you have to go far away, and I'll have to live in the big house with Daddy. Is that true?" Evelyn kissed his forehead and whispered, "No, my son. No one can take you away from me. I promise you on my honor." This brief peace was her motivation to enter this life-or-death battle. The very next day, the tension escalated to a new level. Victoria Sterling used her connections with a local bank to freeze the only joint account Evelyn and Arthur shared, while also using legal maneuvers to block her salary account at her civilian bank. As Evelyn stood at the supermarket checkout line buying milk and food for Leo, her card was repeatedly declined. The people waiting behind her began to whisper, showing irritation. Evelyn had to gather every single penny from her purse to pay. Right then, her phone vibrated. It was a call from Victoria. "How does it feel to have no money, dear ex-daughter-in-law? That's just the beginning. Surrender before I leave you without a single penny to buy bread for my grandson." Evelyn did not panic at all. She hung up, driving her old sedan straight to the Fort Meade military base. But she did not go through the regular administrative gate. She drove through a special security checkpoint, where the guards stood at attention, saluting solemnly upon seeing her special green military ID. She walked into the office of Colonel Marcus Reyes, chief of the Eastern Command JAG Division. Seeing the exhaustion on the face of his most outstanding subordinate, Colonel Reyes pushed a glass of water toward her. "Major Vance, you have dedicated 10 years of your life to bringing corrupt generals and illegal military contractors to courts-martial. You are our best prosecutor. Why are you letting those civilian parasites harass you?" Evelyn replied, "I wanted to handle my family affairs privately, Colonel, but they are crossing the line. They are using money to corrupt the legal system." Colonel Reyes slammed his fist on the table. "The United States military does not let its soldiers be bullied on their own home turf. I have signed off on a special legal protection order for you. Let them see who a JAG prosecutor truly is." The situation peaked on the night before the trial, October 11, 2025. At exactly 11 p.m., 2 Child Protective Services, CPS, caseworkers, and 2 Baltimore County police officers unexpectedly knocked on Evelyn's door. They presented an emergency petition signed by Richard Sterling, accusing Evelyn of possessing illegal substances and committing child abuse in her apartment. Leading them was a CPS caseworker named Donald, notorious for accepting bribes from wealthy families. Donald spoke in an overbearing tone. "We received an emergency report. Ms. Vance, we require you to step aside so we can take the child into temporary protective custody." Faced with the police and CPS at midnight, any typical mother would have wept or resisted frantically, falling straight into the loss of behavioral control trap that Richard had set. But Evelyn merely stood with her arms crossed, her eyes cold as ice. She activated a specialized security camera concealed on her chest, pulled out her phone, and dialed a direct number, putting it on speakerphone. On the other end of the line was the superintendent of the Maryland State Police. "Hello, Major Vance. How can I assist you?" Evelyn calmly stated. "I currently have 2 Baltimore County police officers and a CPS caseworker named Donald attempting to unlawfully enter my residence without a federal judge's search warrant, in direct violation of the Military Officer Protection Statute for active national security duty. I request an immediate verification of their badge numbers." Hearing this, the faces of the 2 county officers instantly turned pale. They exchanged glances, sweat breaking out on their foreheads. Donald from CPS stammered, We were only following a filed report." Evelyn cut him off. "You have 30 seconds to vacate my hallway before military police, MP, from Fort Meade arrive to arrest you for obstructing and threatening a federal officer." In less than 15 seconds, the entire group scrambled in chaos toward the elevator. Evelyn closed the door, breathing a sigh of relief. She looked into her black leather briefcase. In addition to the custody documents, it now contained a highly classified dossier, over 300 pages thick. It was the case file code-named Harbor Tempest. Over the past 18 months, in her role as a supreme military prosecutor, Evelyn had been quietly investigating Sterling Logistics' military equipment transport contracts. They had engaged in fraud, inflating transport costs threefold, and bribing corrupt logistics officers at the Pentagon with millions of dollars to secure bids. The Sterling family thought they were suing a poor, solitary mother, but they were actually facing a nationwide anti-corruption investigation, spearheaded by the very daughter-in-law they despised. Tomorrow's battle in family court would be the graveyard of the entire Sterling clan. Returning to 9 a.m. on October 12, 2025, in Courtroom 402. A suffocating and tense atmosphere filled the room. Judge Charles Reynolds, a middle-aged man with close social connections to the Sterling family, took his place at the bench. Richard Sterling stood up first, adjusting his expensive Brioni suit. Flashing a smug smile, he presented his case in a powerful voice. "Your Honor, this is an incredibly straightforward case. My client, Mr. Arthur Sterling, is a successful businessman with a stable annual income and the absolute support of an esteemed family. Meanwhile, the mother, Miss Evelyn Vance, is an unstable individual. She has no clear occupation, her bank account is currently empty, and she frequently vanishes for weeks on end with no explanation. We request that the court grant full custody of little Leo to the Sterling family and completely strip her visitation rights to protect the child's future." Victoria sat in the gallery, her head held high like a queen witnessing the execution of her enemy. Judge Reynolds looked over at Evelyn, who remained seated silently in her thick overcoat. "Ms. Vance, do you have no legal counsel representing you? Do you have any defense to make against these exceptionally grave accusations?" Evelyn slowly stood up. She showed no sign of fear or confusion. She looked straight at Judge Reynolds, then shifted her gaze to Arthur and Richard. Her voice rang out, clear, poised, and carrying an iron authority that instantly silenced the entire courtroom. "Your Honor, I do not need a civilian attorney, because this trial is not merely a personal custody dispute. It directly concerns a special-tier federal criminal investigation." Richard laughed out loud, interrupting her. "Ms. Vance, this is family court, not your theater stage. Stop making up wild tales to delay the proceedings." Evelyn did not reply with words. She raised her hand to her collar, slowly unbuttoning the thick, moss-green wool overcoat. As the coat was shed and neatly draped over her chair, the entire courtroom let out a collective gasp of utter astonishment. Beneath the coat was the dark green ceremonial dress uniform of the United States Army, pressed crisp without a single crease. On her shoulders, her major's rank insignia gleamed under the fluorescent lights. On her left chest lay 3 rows of brilliant medals, most prominent among them the Bronze Star, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and the insignia of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, JAG. Judge Reynolds stared blankly at the uniform, his face instantly freezing. As a former attorney himself, he knew all too well what the JAG insignia on Evelyn's chest represented. It was supreme federal judicial authority, entirely independent of any state or local court jurisdiction. Evelyn opened the black leather briefcase and pulled out a dossier stamped with a bright red seal reading, Federal Subpoena, Department of Defense. She stepped forward, placing the documents directly onto the clerk's desk. She spoke, each word falling like a hammer blow. I am Major Evelyn Vance, lead prosecutor with the Federal Army Criminal Investigation Command. For the past 18 months, I have personally overseen the investigation of Sterling Logistics on charges of defense contract fraud, money laundering through shell trust funds, and bribery of government officials. Victoria Sterling immediately leaped to her feet, her heavily made-up face now pale as a corpse. Lies! You're just a clerk. Arthur, why did you tell me she was just an office secretary? Arthur was now in complete panic, his knees shaking. He stared at his wife as if looking at a terrifying stranger. He stammered, Mom, I didn't know. She always said she just did administrative work. Evelyn turned to look directly at Richard Sterling, the arrogant lawyer who now stood frozen in place, sweat pouring down his cheeks. Richard, you were right. I was frequently away from home, but those trips were not vacations. I flew to Stuttgart, Germany to freeze Sterling Logistics' secret bank accounts. I went to Okinawa to take depositions from witnesses threatened by your conglomerate. And this? Evelyn pulled out another document. This is the ledger of bribes that Sterling Logistics wired to various local officials in Baltimore to bury workplace accidents and evade taxes. On this list, there is an account owned by a shell company under the name of Judge Charles Reynolds. Judge Reynolds' gavel froze mid-air. The color drained completely from his face. At that exact moment, the heavy double wooden doors of Courtroom 402 were burst open. 4 federal agents from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division, CID, in black suits and displaying badges, accompanied by 2 military police officers in combat uniforms, entered the courtroom. The lead agent walked straight to the plaintiff's table, pulling out 3 pairs of gleaming steel handcuffs. Victoria Sterling, Richard Sterling, Arthur Sterling. You are under arrest by federal warrant for conspiracy to defraud the government, bribery and obstruction of justice. Anything you say from this moment forward can and will be used against you in a federal court. A scene of chaos erupted right there in the family courtroom. Victoria screamed, attempting to resist as the steel cuffs latched onto her aristocratic wrists. Richard collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands in utter despair. Arthur cast a pleading look at Evelyn, but she did not look back at him even once. Judge Reynolds stammered out a ruling to dismiss all of the Sterling party's petitions, recognizing full, permanent custody to Evelyn Vance, before knowing full well that his own judicial seat had officially vanished from that very moment. The case concluded with the federal seizure and freezing of all illegal assets belonging to Sterling Logistics. Victoria and Richard received federal prison sentences of 12 years and 15 years respectively. Arthur, due to his minor role and weak-willed nature, received a 5-year suspended sentence but permanently lost any claim to Leo's trust fund. Civilian justice might be manipulated with money, but justice under the military uniform of people like Evelyn Vance can never be bought or sold. The story of Major Evelyn Vance is not just a personal victory of a mother protecting her child. It is a powerful testament that true glory does not reside in expensive luggage, lavish mansions, or the empty boasts of oligarchs. True glory lies in disciplined silence, in those who quietly dedicate their lives to protecting justice and their homeland from the shadows. They may endure humiliation, they may ignore the mockery of shallow minds, but that is because they carry far greater burdens and responsibilities. Never mistake a soldier's silence for weakness, because when they decide to speak, even the most arrogant systems of corruption will crumble beneath their feet. We will end this story with the very oath of JAG officers, a steel reminder to those who believe money can stand above all else. To those who wish to use the law as a weapon to harm the innocent, remember this: the law belongs to those who are willing to devote their very lives to protect it.